Yes, I sold my mother's beach house, her truck too, and the worst part, I did it behind her back, using the same signature she taught me to write when I was 10. People call me heartless, greedy, a monster who betrayed the woman who gave me everything. But the truth? I wasn't chasing money, I was chasing freedom, the kind I thought she'd never let me have. And in doing so, I destroyed the only person who ever truly loved me. I've done terrible things, but I'm trying to be honest now. If you're watching this, please stay till the end. Maybe my story will stop someone from doing the same. And if you believe in second chances, subscribe and let me know you're out there. Right after I hung up that call, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told myself it was excitement, a new start, Europe, Edward and I, finally free from the weight of the past. But deep down, I knew it was something else, guilt. That heavy kind that clings to your skin and doesn't wash off no matter how many times you shower. I stared at my phone screen. Call ended. That was it. 2 minutes. 2 minutes to erase 30 years of my mother's love. Edward walked in, grinning, holding the printed confirmation from the buyer. "It's done," he said, kissing my forehead. "You did good, babe." I smiled back, but my stomach turned. "She'll be fine," I whispered, mostly to myself. "She has her pension. She'll manage." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence meant approval. That's all I wanted. Someone to tell me I wasn't a monster. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice in my head, the way she used to call me Angie when I was little, her tone soft even when she was tired. I imagined her sitting on that porch, watching the tide roll in, waiting for me to visit. And now, there would be strangers living there, eating in her kitchen, sleeping in her room. I turned on my side, pressing my face into the pillow, and told myself it was for the best. "You did what you had to do," I whispered. "She would have held you back." But that lie cracked faster than I thought. The next morning, when I saw the empty space where her truck used to be, the same one she drove to take me to school every morning, something in me twisted. I felt both powerful and hollow, like I'd won something I didn't want. I wanted to text her, to say sorry, to explain, but I didn't know what to say. What kind of apology starts with, "Mum, I forged your signature"? I spent the next few days packing, pretending it was all part of a bigger plan. Edward talked about hostels, jobs, visas, dreams. I nodded, smiled, repeated his words like they were prayers. But every time he said freedom, I heard running away. I wasn't sure what I was escaping, my mother, my shame, or myself, maybe all three. At the airport, I watched families hug, cry, promise to call. I didn't have that. I had a boarding pass and a man who didn't even look back to see if I was following. When the plane took off, I thought of her sitting alone in that big house, the sound of waves outside. Did she cry? Did she curse me? Or did she just sit in silence like she always did when she was hurt, quiet enough to make me feel small without saying a word? Somewhere over the ocean, I realized I hadn't even told her I loved her, not once, not in years. I said thanks or see you soon, but never that word. I don't know why. Maybe because I assumed she already knew. Maybe because saying it would have made me too aware of how much I was taking from her. When we landed, Edward grabbed his bag and said, "Welcome to your new life." I smiled because that's what he expected. But inside, I felt nothing, just a dull ache sitting where my heart used to be. It followed me everywhere, to the cheap hotel room, to the foreign grocery store, to the job interviews that went nowhere. I'd scroll through my messages sometimes, half expecting to see her name. But she never texted, not once. She kept her silence, and that hurt more than any curse could have. I started to wonder if this was how punishment really worked, not with yelling or consequences, but with absence. She didn't chase me, didn't threaten legal action, didn't call. She just disappeared from my world, and I was left to face the echo of my choices. At night, when Edward was asleep, I'd open my phone and look at pictures from the beach house, the curtains she sewed herself, the shells we collected when I was a kid, that faded blue couch where she used to read. Every image felt like a wound. I'd close my eyes and see her smile, the one she gave me whenever she handed me something new, a toy, a dress, a chance. And I realized that's what she'd always done. She gave, I took. That was the pattern. Always her giving, always me taking, until there was nothing left to take. I told myself I'd make it up to her once things settled, once I got the job, once I made real money, once I could show her I wasn't a failure, but once never came. Each day made it harder to reach out. Shame grows fast when you feed it silence. And by the time I finally admitted to myself that I missed her, it was already too late to undo the damage. Sometimes I wonder if she knew from the beginning. She's smarter than I ever gave her credit for. Maybe she saw it coming, the sale, the lie, the distance. Maybe she let it happen because she knew I'd never learn otherwise. It's the kind of thing she would do, protect me by letting me fall. That thought kept me awake for months. It still does. Because if she did know, then every tear I shed was part of a lesson I didn't deserve to be taught so kindly. When I look back now, it didn't start with greed. It started with exhaustion. Years of feeling like a guest in my own life. My mother, Antonia Brooks, ran that house like it was a small kingdom. And I was her only heir, the little princess who never had to lift a finger. That sounds lovely until you realize that when everything is handed to you, you never learn how to hold anything steady. I grew up inside the hum of the ocean. Salt on the air, sand in the hallways, wind whistling through the screens. That beach house wasn't just a home, it was her temple. She built her routines around it. Morning coffee on the porch, shell collecting walks at sunset, Sunday dinners where no one was allowed to check their phones. She worked double shifts at the diner to pay it off. Every story she told ended with, "One day this will all be yours." And maybe that was the problem. When someone tells you something will be yours long enough, you stop trying to earn it. I took it for granted that the house, the truck, even her love were permanent, like the tide that always came back. When I was 16, I remember begging her to let me go to a summer art program in New York. She said no, too dangerous, too expensive. I screamed that she was selfish, that she didn't want me to have a life beyond that town. She didn't scream back. She just looked at me, disappointed. That look haunted me more than any punishment. I realized then that love from her came with rules, gratitude, respect, staying close. I promised myself I'd leave the first chance I got. College was supposed to be that chance, but I never finished. I met Edward during my second year, a man with a smile sharp enough to cut through every insecurity I had. He was older, confident, a traveler who said things like, "You've got potential," and "You're too smart to stay small." He made me feel like I was more than Antonia Brooks' daughter. At first, Mum liked him. He was polite, helpful, even fixed the porch light. But soon she saw what I refused to, his restlessness, his hunger for more. She'd watch him talk about investments, startups, and the European opportunity, and her lips would tighten. One night after dinner, she pulled me aside. "Angela," she said quietly, "men like him love the chase more than the home. Be careful." I rolled my eyes. "You just don't like anyone who might take me away from you." That was the first time I saw real hurt in her eyes. Not anger, hurt. But I was too wrapped up in the idea of freedom to care. Over the next few years, the distance between us grew invisible but deep. Calls became shorter, visits less frequent. I started measuring my success by how far I could live without asking for her help. But when my father died, everything collapsed. I flew home for the funeral. The air in the beach house felt heavier, full of things unsaid. Mum looked smaller, quieter. She handed me paperwork saying, "Just in case anything happens to me, you should know where everything is." That's how I saw the power of attorney document for the first time. She signed it so I could handle small legal tasks if she got sick. It wasn't meant for what I did later, but at that moment, it felt like trust. Edward came to the funeral, wearing a black suit he could barely afford. Everyone praised him for being there for me. He saw the house, the land, the truck, and I saw the spark in his eyes when he asked about property values along the coast. Weeks later, he told me about a business partner in Italy. Angela, he said, we could buy in, but we need cash fast. We sell the truck, maybe the house, move overseas. Your mum's not using it much anyway. She's got retirement, she'll be fine. I laughed at first. You're insane. That's her world. He shrugged. You said she wanted you to have it one day, right? Maybe that day's now. That line stuck in my head like a splinter. Maybe that day's now. Maybe this was the moment she'd been saving everything for, to give me a life beyond that porch. I twisted his selfish idea into something noble. For weeks I fought myself. I imagined the conversation with Mum, how she'd look at me, how she'd say, "You're not ready." And I couldn't bear hearing that again. I wanted, just once, to prove I was capable of big decisions, even reckless ones. So I started rationalizing. Selling the house wasn't betrayal, it was evolution. Moving on. A new chapter. She'd built a safe life, and I was building a bold one. Different paths, same love. That's what I told myself. Edward handled the paperwork. I just signed what he told me to. I didn't even read the details. When the notary asked for ID, I gave mine confidently, pretending nothing felt wrong. But when I traced my mother's signature, Antonia Brooks, in perfect loops, my hand trembled. I remembered her teaching me cursive at the kitchen table, her hand guiding mine. Every letter tells the world who you are, she'd said. That memory almost stopped me. Almost. I mailed the forms the next day. Edward popped champagne that night, celebrating like we'd just won the lottery. You did it, he said. You finally took control. Control. That word felt sweet then. Now it tastes like rust. In the days after, I waited for the guilt to fade. It didn't. Instead, every sound, the phone ringing, a knock at the door, made my heart lurch. I kept rehearsing lies in my head. It was a good deal. You'll understand later. I did it for us. Lies that sounded reasonable until you said them out loud. The money arrived faster than I expected. Numbers in a bank account that looked unreal. Edward immediately started spending. Tickets, plans, promises. I followed because I didn't want to face what I'd done. Running felt easier than apologizing. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Mum had called right then. If she'd begged, cried, yelled, anything, maybe I would have turned back. But she didn't. She stayed silent. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she was waiting to see how far I'd go before I realized how much I'd lost. And the truth is, I didn't just sell her house. I sold the one place where I'd ever truly belonged. The first night after the sale went through, Edward cooked pasta in our tiny apartment. He poured cheap wine into fancy glasses and said, "To freedom." I clinked mine against his, pretending I believed the words still meant something pure. Freedom used to sound like music to me. That night it sounded like debt collecting interest. He started talking about visas, business meetings, people he knew in Milan. I didn't understand half of it, but I nodded. He needed me to nod. He needed my belief the way I used to need my mother's. I told myself that was love, trusting someone even when you don't fully understand them. For weeks we planned our new life. Every plan began with, when we get there. When we get there, we'll rent a small flat. When we get there, we'll start over. When we get there, you'll finally be free of her rules. He said it like a blessing. I didn't realize it was a curse. Mum called once during that time. I didn't answer. The phone kept buzzing until it stopped. I told myself she'd move on. That maybe silence was kinder than hearing me justify betrayal. I didn't want to hear her breathing through tears. The house sold faster than anyone expected. The buyers were a middle-aged couple from Ohio. They wanted a summer place by the water, something peaceful. When Edward told me, I almost laughed. They were buying peace. I was selling mine. The day I signed the final release papers, I felt something inside me shift. I thought it was relief, but it was actually the beginning of numbness. After that, I stopped thinking about right or wrong. I just thought about movement, packing, traveling, leaving. Mum texted me one line the next morning. "I hope you know what you're doing, Angela." I stared at it for an hour before replying. Then I deleted every word before I could send it. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't sound like an excuse. Edward noticed me staring at the phone. "She'll forgive you eventually," he said. "You don't know her," I whispered. He smiled. "Then she'll get used to it." That was the moment I realized he didn't just want me to leave my mother, he wanted me to unlearn her completely, to erase every bit of discipline, empathy, caution she'd planted in me. And I let him. Because love, real or imagined, can be a dangerous permission slip. The weeks before we left felt like walking through fog. I sold off the furniture, closed bank accounts, packed photo frames I didn't even like just to fill boxes. I told everyone we were moving for work. No one asked more. No one ever does when a lie sounds confident enough. The night before our flight, I drove by the beach house one last time. I parked across the street, lights off. The windows glowed warm inside. She was home. I could see her silhouette moving in the kitchen, probably washing dishes, humming. She always hummed when she was tired. My throat tightened. For a second, I almost got out of the car. I almost ran up the porch and confessed everything. Told her it was me, that I was scared, that I didn't want to go. But then I saw her sit down at the table and bow her head. She was praying. And that's when shame turned into anger. I told myself she was praying against me, not for me. I gripped the steering wheel and whispered, "You made me this way." It was easier to blame her than face what I'd done. When I drove away, I didn't look back. On the plane, Edward held my hand and said, "No regrets, right?" I forced a laugh. "None." He grinned. "Good, you're stronger than you think." But strength built on guilt is brittle. It cracks the first time life tests it. We landed in Paris first, then took a train south. Everything was supposed to feel cinematic, our grand adventure. But all I felt was displacement. The air smelled different, the language wrapped around me like glass I couldn't touch. I kept checking my phone even though I knew there'd be no message from home. Edward started changing slowly. He talked less about we and more about I. He made friends I never met, took calls outside, left me waiting in cafes with bills I couldn't read. Every time I asked questions, he'd sigh, say, "Trust me." That phrase used to thrill me. Now it sounded like a warning. One evening, after another argument about money, he slammed the door and left. I sat on the bed, staring at my hands. I thought about my mother's hands, steady, practical, always busy with something real, cooking, mending, building. Mine looked fragile, all show, no substance. I tried to picture what she was doing at that exact moment. Maybe sitting on the porch again, watching the waves. Maybe telling herself she didn't raise a criminal. Or maybe she was just sitting in silence, wondering where she went wrong. That night, for the first time since we left, I dreamt of the beach house. It was empty. No furniture, no sound, just wind and light. I walked through it, calling her name, but she never answered. When I woke up, I was crying. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing small cracks in Edward's stories. The business partner was always travelling. The investment kept needing more money. He told me to stay positive, that once things were set, we'd be rich. I wanted to believe him, because if he was lying, it meant I'd ruined my mother's life for nothing. But somewhere inside, I already knew. The day the final wire transfer hit, he disappeared for 48 hours. When he came back, he smelled like alcohol and guilt. He avoided eye contact and said he'd lost some of the money in a deal gone wrong. I didn't scream. I just nodded. Because screaming would have meant I still believed I had a right to be angry. I told myself it wasn't over. We'd rebuild. We'd make it work. But deep down, the illusion was collapsing. Every time he touched me, it felt transactional. Every time he said, "Trust me," I heard my mother's voice saying, "Be careful." That's when I started writing emails to her, drafts I never sent. Things like, "I know you hate me. I hate me too." Or "I thought I was saving us, but I only saved him." I'd type until tears blurred the screen, then delete everything. When Edward suggested we move again, this time to Spain, I realised he was running, not building. And I was just baggage he carried until something better came along. I began to understand what my mother meant when she warned me. Love without roots isn't freedom, it's drift. By the time he finally left for good, taking most of what was left, I wasn't surprised. I just sat there, in a room with cracked paint and unpaid rent, staring out the window at strangers speaking a language I couldn't follow. I'd sold everything for this view. And somewhere, thousands of miles away, my mother was still alive, still silent, still teaching me lessons she never had to say out loud. I told myself I'd go back one day, face her, apologize. But I didn't know how to begin that conversation. How do you start a sentence that has to carry every regret you've ever had? Maybe with the same words that started it all. Mum, I'm sorry. The first time I realized I'd crossed a line was in a hotel lobby in Madrid. Edward was arguing with a clerk about our reservation, waving his hands like the world owed him something. I stood behind him, clutching 2 suitcases that carried everything we owned. For the first time, I saw him the way strangers did, impatient, entitled, fragile behind all that charm. He turned and snapped, "Say something! Don't just stand there!" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. What could I say? That I was starting to see the cracks? That I finally understood what my mother meant when she said, "Love should make you calm, not small." That night, he apologized with kisses and promises. "I'm under pressure, Angie. You know I'm doing this for us." I nodded, because saying no meant admitting I'd bet my soul on the wrong man. In the quiet after he fell asleep, I scrolled through old photos on my phone. There was one of Mum on the porch, laughing at something stupid I'd said. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. She looked happy, whole. And I wondered if she still laughed like that now. I thought about calling her, just once, to say I was okay, to say thank you. But the fear of her silence was worse than any curse, so I didn't. Weeks later, the tension between Edward and me was thick enough to taste. Money was running out. He'd started talking about selling my jewelry, even the small ring Mum gave me for graduation. I told him no. He said, "You're still attached to her, aren't you? Even now." I said, "She's my mother." He smiled in that cold way people do when they think they've won. "And I'm your future. You need to choose." Choose, that word made me sick because I'd already chosen, and I chose wrong. I started noticing little things. His phone always face down, the way he disappeared for hours on business, the lies that no longer even tried to sound real. I wanted to confront him, but what would I threaten him with? Morality? I'd sold mine months ago. One evening, I found a message on his laptop, a woman's name, words too familiar to be business. I stared at it until my eyes burned. When he came in, I didn't scream. I just said, "Who is she?" He froze, then laughed. "You're paranoid. You're turning into your mother." That sentence broke something inside me. My mother wasn't paranoid. She was perceptive, and I'd traded her wisdom for a man who couldn't even tell the truth. That night, I packed a small bag, my passport, a few clothes, what little cash I had left. I told myself I'd go home, face her, apologize, start over. But when I stood at the train station, staring at the departures board, I couldn't move. Every destination looked like an escape, not redemption. I was too ashamed to face her, too scared to face myself. So I turned around, went back to the apartment, and unpacked. When Edward came home, I acted like nothing had happened. I made dinner. I laughed at his jokes. I told myself that maybe forgiveness could grow in the same soil as deceit if you just watered it enough. I was wrong. In that moment, I knew I was past the point of return. Not because of what I'd done, but because I'd stopped believing I could still be good. After that night, I started living on autopilot. Every morning, I'd wake up beside him and pretend we were still a team. Every night, I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep playing this version of myself. Guilt is strange. It doesn't come all at once. It drips, slow and steady, until you're soaked in it without realizing. Edward began making bigger promises, talking about reinvesting what little money we had left. I stopped asking for details. I didn't want to hear the lies out loud. As long as I stayed silent, I could pretend we still had something worth saving. Then came the letter from the bank. Our account was overdrawn. The investment he made had vanished, and with it, the last bit of security I had. When I confronted him, he didn't flinch. You knew the risks, he said flatly. No, I whispered. You knew the risks. You just never told me. He rolled his eyes. Don't start with the blame game, Angela. We're in this together. Together? I laughed, bitter. You've been in it for yourself since day one. He stood up, angry. Everything I did was for us. You wanted a new life, didn't you? Well, freedom isn't cheap. Freedom? I snapped. You mean running away? He slammed the door so hard the frame cracked. I slid down to the floor, shaking. That's when I finally said it out loud, the words I'd avoided since the beginning. I ruined her life for this. The sentence hung in the air like smoke. The next morning, he was gone. No note, no call, just gone. I checked his things. Most of his clothes were missing, along with my laptop and the last few €100 we had. The apartment felt smaller, emptier. I thought I'd feel anger, but all I felt was relief. For the first time in months, the silence was mine. I spent the next few days barely eating, barely moving. I stared out the window and thought about home, about Mum, about the porch light she always left on, even when I came home late. I wondered if it was still shining. I wondered if she'd turn it off if she knew what I'd done. By the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I dug out the old SIM card from my American phone, bought a cheap adapter, and turned it on. The screen blinked to life, showing a flood of missed calls and unread messages from months ago, none recent, none from her. That silence cut deeper than any words. I dialed her number anyway. It rang once, twice. Then the automated voice said the line was disconnected. I froze. She'd changed her number. Of course she had. Why would she keep it open for someone who vanished after stealing her home? Something inside me broke then. The denial, the excuses, the little walls I'd built to keep myself from feeling the truth, they all crumbled. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and now there was nothing left to hide behind. I booked a one-way flight home that night, using what little credit I had left. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even tell myself it was for forgiveness. It was just gravity. Every lie I'd told had finally pulled me back to the place I betrayed. On the flight, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying memories, Mum brushing my hair before school, her laughter echoing down the hall, the way she'd squeeze my hand during thunderstorms. Each one felt like a ghost sitting beside me. When I landed, I didn't go straight to her. I couldn't. I wandered the city for hours, watching people hurry to their jobs, their homes, their normal lives. I felt like a shadow drifting between them. That evening, I finally took a cab to the coast. As we drove past the familiar curve of the road, I saw it. The beach house. Or what used to be ours. New paint, new mailbox, strange cars in the driveway. The porch light was still there, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I sat in the back seat, frozen, as the cab driver asked, "You getting out, ma'am?" I shook my head. "Not here. Keep going." We drove past, and I caught one last glimpse of the ocean through the window. For the first time, it didn't look peaceful. It looked endless, like a mirror that showed you exactly who you were, whether you liked it or not. That night, I rented a small room near the diner where Mum used to work. The walls smelled like bleach and loneliness. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles, and thought, this is what freedom really feels like. Empty. And that's when I knew I couldn't run anymore. I had to face her. Even if she never forgave me, even if she didn't want to see me, I owed her that. I owed myself that. The next morning, I set out to find her. When I finally stood in front of the diner's glass door, I almost turned around. The smell of grease and coffee hit me before I even stepped inside, and suddenly I was 16 again, waiting for Mom to finish her shift so she could drive me home. That door used to open to comfort. Now it opened to shame. Inside, everything looked the same. The same cracked tiles, the same faded photos of sunsets along the coast. But the woman behind the counter wasn't her. She was younger, thinner, new. When I asked about Antonia Brooks, she frowned. "Oh, she quit last year," the woman said. "Moved inland, I think. Some small town north of here. Quiet lady, kept to herself. You know her?" I nodded, throat tight. She's my mother. The woman's eyes softened. Oh, I'm sorry. She was nice, hardworking, talked about her daughter a lot. I managed a weak smile. Did she ever mention where exactly she went? She shook her head. Just said she was done with the ocean. Done with the ocean. I stood there for a long moment trying to breathe. For Mum, that house wasn't just shelter, it was her identity. If she'd left the ocean, it meant she'd left the version of herself that believed in me. I left the diner with nothing but a paper cup of coffee and a name the waitress remembered, Mr. Peterson. The lawyer who'd helped Mum sell the house. He might know where she was. When I showed up at his office, the receptionist looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. You're Antonia's daughter, she said quietly. She told us not to give out her address to anyone, but maybe you should wait here. I sat in that waiting room for what felt like forever. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, tired, drained. When the lawyer finally came out, he didn't look surprised. Angela, he said softly, motioning for me to follow. I wondered when this day would come. His office smelled like paper and regret. He poured water into a glass and slid it across the desk. Your mother's been through a lot. I nodded, staring at my hands. So have I. He sighed. She never pressed charges. She could have, but she didn't. Do you know why? I shook my head. Because she said losing you once was punishment enough. The words hit me like a slap. I swallowed hard. Do you know where she is now? He hesitated, then opened a drawer, pulling out a folded piece of paper. She left this, said if you ever came back, I should give it to you. I reached for it, but my hands were trembling too much to unfold it. He pushed a box of tissues closer. She's about 2 hours north, in a town called Maple Hill, working part-time at a library. She doesn't know I'm telling you, but maybe it's time. I left his office with the letter clutched to my chest. I didn't read it until I got back to the room. The paper was lined, her handwriting neat as always. Angela, if you're reading this, it means you finally stopped running. I want you to know that I never hated you. I hated what you became when you let fear make your choices. I still pray for you, every night. Not that you come back, but that you learn peace. If you ever find yourself standing in front of something broken, don't just walk away. Fix it. Love, Mum. I read it 3 times before the words made sense. I had imagined 1,000 versions of what she'd say if I came back. Anger, tears, rejection, but not this, not grace. The next morning, I took the earliest bus to Maple Hill. The town looked like time had stopped there. A single street of shops, an old water tower, and a library that doubled as a community centre. I stood outside for a full minute before going in. The bell above the door jingled softly. A woman at the desk looked up, and it was her. Her hair was greyer, tied back in a loose bun. There were lines around her eyes that I hadn't seen before. But it was her, my mother. She froze when she saw me. The air felt heavy with everything we hadn't said. "Hi, Mum," I whispered. She didn't speak, not for a full 10 seconds. Then she set her pen down carefully, walked around the counter, and stood in front of me. "Angela," she said, voice calm, "you look tired." That's all, not how could you or why did you. Just that simple observation, heavy with meaning. "I came to say sorry," I said. "I know it's late." She nodded slowly. "It's never too late to tell the truth, but it's too early to expect forgiveness." That hurt, but it was fair. We sat in the back room, surrounded by shelves of books. She made me tea the way she always did when I was upset. For the first time in years, I felt small again, like a daughter, not a criminal. "I thought I was saving us," I said quietly. "I thought if I could just prove I could build a life without you." She interrupted gently. "You didn't have to prove anything, Angela. You just had to be kind." Her words landed like truth always does, soft and brutal at the same time. "I'm working now," I said, "trying to start over." It's not much, but I'm doing better. She nodded. Good. That's all I ever wanted, for you to live right. We didn't hug, we didn't cry, we just sat there, two women bound by blood and regret, sipping tea that tasted like both warmth and distance. When I left, she didn't ask where I was staying, she didn't invite me over, but as I reached the door, she said, "Come back next week, there's always work to do here." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. That night, back in my room, I lay awake replaying her words. I thought forgiveness was something you received, but maybe it's something you earn, piece by piece, by showing up, by staying, by not running anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted to stay. The following week, I went back to the library like she'd asked. I didn't know what I expected, maybe a smile, maybe a sign that she'd forgiven me overnight. But when I walked in, she just pointed to a cart full of books. "Shelve these," she said. So I did. No lecture, no warmth, no hostility, just quiet work. The sound of pages sliding into place became the soundtrack of my penance. For days, we barely spoke beyond what was necessary. She gave instructions. I followed them. I learnt to keep my voice low, my eyes open, my pride down. Every time our hands brushed when we passed books to each other, something inside me twisted. I wanted to say thank you, sorry, I love you, all at once. But she wasn't ready to hear it, and I wasn't strong enough to force it. The regular visitors started recognizing me, the old ladies who came for romance novels, the high school kids doing homework, the man who always asked for local newspapers from 20 years ago. They'd smile politely, unaware that I used to own a house by the ocean and threw it all away. Sometimes, after closing, Mum would sit by the window, balancing the register. I'd linger by the doorway, waiting for her to say something. Eventually, she did. "Edward?" she asked one night, not looking up from the ledger. "Gone," I said simply. She nodded. Good. That was it. No pity, no "I told you so." Just that single word, good, like closing a chapter. Over the next months, something shifted between us. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was cooperation. We shared space without tension. She let me stay in a spare room behind the library, just a cot, a desk, and a tiny window that faced the trees. I didn't complain. After everything I'd taken, it felt like luxury. Work became my redemption. I started showing up early, fixing small things she never asked me to fix, tightening hinges, cleaning windows, reorganizing shelves. People noticed. They'd thank me and I'd smile, not because I was proud, but because it felt good to be useful again. One rainy afternoon, a woman came in with her little boy, asking for children's books. I recognized the exhaustion in her face, the kind that comes from trying to hold a life together. I helped her find a few titles and told the boy he could keep one of the bookmarks I'd made from recycled paper. His eyes lit up. After they left, Mum said quietly, "You've always been good with kids." I froze, surprised by the softness in her tone. "I got that from you," I said. She didn't answer, but I caught the faintest smile before she turned away. It was small, but it meant more than any apology could. Weeks turned into months. The rhythm of small-town life became a kind of healing, slow, repetitive, honest. I stopped checking my phone, stopped wishing for a different story. I learnt to sit with silence without needing to fill it. But guilt has a long memory. Every time I saw an ocean photo in a travel magazine, my chest tightened. I still hadn't told her the whole truth, about forging her signature, about how deliberate it all was. She thought Edward manipulated me, and while that was partly true, I knew I'd gone along willingly. I'd wanted the escape, the lie, the illusion of control. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I found her locking up the back door and said, "Mum, there's something I need to tell you." She looked tired. "It's late." "I know, but please." She sighed, leaned against the counter and crossed her arms. "Go on." "I didn't just sell the house because of him," I said. "I wanted to. I wanted to prove I could survive without you. I told myself it was independence, but it was pride. I forged your signature. You didn't lose that house. You were robbed. By me. Her eyes closed slowly, like she was trying to breathe through the sting. When she opened them again, they weren't angry, they were sad. I know, she said quietly. I blinked. You knew? She nodded. Mr. Peterson showed me the paperwork. The handwriting was perfect, but not perfect enough. I recognized the tremor in your A. You always hesitated before finishing a word. I couldn't speak. My knees felt weak. Why didn't you say anything? She exhaled. Because you wouldn't have listened, and because I wanted you to see what your choices looked like from the other side. Sometimes pain teaches what love can't. Her words broke me. I started crying right there in the empty library, ugly, uncontrollable sobs that I'd been holding in for years. I'm sorry, I choked out. I'm so sorry, Mom. She reached out, hesitant, then placed a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a hug, but it was mercy. Sorry is a start, she said softly. But don't say it to feel better. Say it to become better. From that night on, everything changed. Not dramatically, but quietly. We started eating dinner together in the back room. She taught me how to balance the library accounts. Sometimes we'd walk home together and she'd tell me small stories about the town, nothing deep, just fragments of a life rebuilt. I realized she wasn't just forgiving me, she was showing me how to live again. I picked up a part-time job at a bakery down the street. Waking up at 4 a.m. to knead dough, coming home with flour on my hands, it was humbling. But I liked it. It felt real. For once, I earned what I had. Every paycheck, I set aside a small envelope labeled Repay. It wasn't much, just a few dollars at a time, but it gave me a sense of purpose. When I finally told her about it, she shook her head. You don't owe me money, Angela. Yes, I do. No, she said firmly. You owe yourself a clean conscience. That's harder to earn than cash. She was right. One evening, after closing, we sat outside the library steps watching the sunset bleed across the sky. It reminded me of the beach, gold melting into pink, the same quiet ache in the air. Do you miss it? I asked. The ocean? She smiled faintly. Sometimes. But peace doesn't live in a place. It lives in people. Once I lost that house, I realized I hadn't lost everything, just what I was ready to let go of. Her words sank deep. For the first time, I understood what freedom really meant. Not running away, not proving anything, just being still and honest in the life you've chosen. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time since everything happened. I didn't write about guilt or loss. I wrote about gratitude, about the way she still made tea the same way, about how forgiveness isn't a door that swings open, it's a slow creak that takes both hands to push. And somewhere between the ink and the tears, I realized something simple. I hadn't just ruined her life, I'd interrupted it. And now I was learning how to stay long enough to help rebuild it. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of day that pretends to be ordinary until it isn't. I was restocking the front shelves when Mr. Peterson walked into the library. He looked older, heavier around the eyes. Mom was behind the desk. The second she saw him, she stiffened. Antonia, he said softly, we need to talk. She glanced at me, then nodded toward the back office. Come in. I froze where I stood. Something about his tone made my stomach tighten. I started to follow, but she said, without turning, Stay here, Angela. So I waited, pretending to tidy books while every nerve in my body strained to catch a word, a sound. I could hear their muffled voices through the door, low and tense. Then suddenly Mom's voice rose, sharp, controlled but shaking. You didn't tell me it was this bad, she said. A pause. Then Mr. Peterson again. She deserves to know. If we don't act now, she'll lose everything left in her name. The blood drained from my face. Lose everything left? What did that mean? I pushed open the door before either of them could stop me. What's going on? I asked. Mr. Peterson looked at me like a doctor about to deliver bad news. Angela, do you remember the second account Edward opened under your name? My throat closed. Yes. What about it? It wasn't just under your name, he said quietly. It was also under your mother's, because of the power of attorney you used years ago. He's been using that to secure loans, large ones, against her credit. I felt the room tilt. No, that can't be. I cancelled everything after. He cut me off gently. Not all of it. The bank's been trying to contact you both for months. They're moving toward legal action. If we don't clear this up, your mother's retirement could be seized. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The sound of the rain outside blurred into static. I'll fix it, I said finally. I'll take responsibility. Mom was silent. When I turned to her, her face looked carved from stone. You forged my name once, she said. Now you'll sign it again, but this time to admit what you did. Her voice wasn't angry. It was colder than anger, steady, surgical. We drove to the law office together. The silence in the car was unbearable. I wanted her to yell, to say something that would make me feel small, because small meant forgiven. But she said nothing. Only her hands, gripping the wheel, told me how hard she was fighting to stay calm. At the office, I signed the declaration. My hands shook so badly the pen slipped twice. The clerk didn't meet my eyes. When it was over, Mr. Peterson handed me a copy and said, "This will help clear your mother's record, but it might take time." "Do whatever it takes," I said, "even if it ruins mine." Mom turned to leave, but I stopped her. "Wait, please. I didn't know he'd done that. I thought—" She cut me off. "You thought you could control damage while living in the wreckage. That's not how life works." We walked out into the drizzle. The world looked grey, washed out, like even the sky didn't want to see us. At the car, she finally spoke again. "You'll have to testify if this goes to court," she said. "Are you ready for that?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'll do whatever I have to." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then maybe this is where you finally start growing up." I wanted to tell her I already had, that I'd changed. But I knew words meant nothing anymore. Only actions did. That night, back in the little room behind the library, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her sitting under the fluorescent light at that desk, signing forms that shouldn't exist, cleaning up messes she didn't make. I hated Edward for what he'd done, but more than that, I hated the version of myself that had opened the door for him. At some point past midnight, I got up, pulled out my journal, and wrote one sentence over and over until the page tore beneath the ink. You can't heal in silence. Then I picked up my phone and did something I hadn't done in months. I called the bank myself. I gave them every detail, every lie, every forged paper, every transaction. I told them to use my name, my record, my credit. I told them to leave her out of it. By the time I hung up, my voice was gone, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years. The next morning, Mom didn't mention the call. But when she passed me a cup of coffee, her hand lingered on mine for a second longer than usual. That single quiet gesture said everything words couldn't. She saw what I was trying to do, and for now, that was enough. The hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning. I barely slept the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the clerk's pen scratching across the paper, felt the weight of every lie I'd ever told pressing down on my chest. Mom came with me. She didn't have to. Mr. Peterson said her presence wasn't required, but she came anyway. She sat beside me in the waiting room, her purse on her lap, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for being here," I said quietly. She didn't look at me. "I'm here for the truth, Angela, not for you." It hurt, but she was right. When they called my name, my knees almost gave out. I walked into the small chamber where 3 officials sat behind a desk stacked with files. The air smelled like paper, ink, and judgment. They asked questions, dates, signatures, transfers. Each word felt like another shovel of dirt covering the version of me I used to be. "Ms. Brooks," one of them said, "did you knowingly forge your mother's signature to sell the property?" Yes, I said. My voice cracked, but I didn't look away. Did you receive the funds personally? Yes. Did you know those actions were fraudulent? Yes. I could feel Mom's gaze on the back of my head, heavy and still. The questions went on for what felt like hours. By the time it ended, I was trembling. The clerk stamped a document and slid it across the table. This statement will clear your mother of liability. The penalties will apply to you only. Understood, I whispered. They dismissed us, and just like that, it was over. Years of deceit reduced to a few sheets of paper and an official stamp. Outside, the sunlight was too bright. I blinked against it, dizzy. Mum walked ahead, her heels clicking against the pavement. I wanted to run after her, to explain, to thank her, to say I love you. But my throat refused to work. Halfway down the steps, my legs gave out. I sat on the cold stone, tears spilling before I could stop them. I didn't cry quietly. It came out raw, ugly, desperate, the sound of everything breaking at once. People passed by, pretending not to notice. Except her. She stopped, turned around. For a moment she just stood there, watching me crumble. Then she came back, slowly, and crouched in front of me. "Get up," she said softly. "People are watching." "I can't," I gasped. "I don't deserve to." Her eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen since before everything fell apart. "Angela, standing up isn't something you earn. It's something you do when you're done falling." She held out her hand, and I took it. When I stood, she brushed the dirt from my sleeve, the same way she used to when I was a child. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was care, and that was enough to keep me breathing. We walked to the parking lot in silence. Before she opened the car door, she said quietly, "You faced it, that matters." I nodded. "I just wanted you to see that I'm not hiding anymore." She looked at me for a long moment. "I see that, but it'll take time before I can look at you without remembering the lie." I swallowed hard. "I'll wait." The drive home was silent except for the hum of the tires. I stared out the window, watching the coastline blur past. For the first time in years, I noticed how the sunlight danced on the water. The same ocean that had witnessed my betrayal now reflected something softer, a beginning I didn't yet deserve but was slowly moving toward. That night, I sat outside the library under the streetlight. The air smelled like rain and paper. I thought about everything that had happened, every decision that brought me here, and something inside me finally shifted. I realized redemption wasn't about being forgiven. It was about choosing truth again and again, even when it hurt. Mum locked up and walked toward me. "You should rest," she said. I nodded, then asked, "Do you think I can ever make it right?" She paused. "No one ever makes it right, Angela. We just learn to live better after we break things." She turned to leave, but before stepping inside, she added, almost to herself, "You're doing that." It was the smallest sentence, but it hit harder than any judgment. For the first time in a long time, I let myself breathe, not in relief, but in acceptance. I wasn't the villain pretending to be redeemed anymore. I was just a broken person learning how to stand again. And sometimes, that's enough. After the hearing, life didn't suddenly get better. No one hands you a certificate for redemption. There was no applause, no moment of glory, no cinematic sunrise, just quiet days, one after another, where I woke up, went to work, and tried not to flinch at my own reflection. The first few mornings after, I kept waiting for shame to fade. It didn't. It simply changed shape. It became quieter, heavier, like a shadow that learned to walk beside me instead of over me. Mum didn't talk about what happened. She didn't praise me for owning up or scold me for the mess I'd made. She just treated me normally. That was her way of saying, "You're still here." We fell into a rhythm again, morning coffee, opening the library, exchanging small talk about overdue books. I didn't dare ask if she'd forgiven me. I realized forgiveness isn't something you ask for, it's something you create space for. One afternoon, I found her outside sweeping the library steps. The wind was strong, carrying leaves across the street. She stopped, leaning on the broom, and said quietly, "You've changed." I turned toward her. "How can you tell?" "You listen now," she said. "Before, you only waited to talk." Her words made me smile. Small, but real. I hadn't noticed that shift myself. But maybe change isn't loud. Maybe it happens in the spaces between silence and truth. Later that week, she asked if I wanted to come with her to the beach. The beach. I hadn't been near the ocean since everything happened. The idea made my chest tighten. But I said yes. We drove in her old sedan, the same one she'd driven when I was a teenager. The seats still smelled faintly of salt and vanilla. As we reached the coast, I felt the air thicken with memories. The road curved, and there it was, the shoreline, the horizon, the sound of waves colliding like they were arguing with the world. We parked near a public walkway, not in front of our old house. I couldn't look at it yet, but close enough to feel its ghost. We sat on a bench overlooking the water. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The sun hung low, turning the waves gold. Finally, she said, "Do you remember when you were little, how you used to ask if the ocean ever got tired?" I laughed softly. "And you said it didn't. You said it just kept coming back no matter what." She nodded. "I think people are like that too. We leave, we break, we drown, but somehow we keep coming back." I looked at her then, the woman who had every reason to hate me but didn't. "You really forgive me, don't you?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked out at the horizon. "Forgiveness isn't something I give. It's something we build, brick by brick. You're helping me build it." Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to hug her, but I didn't. I just sat there, letting the sound of the sea fill the space between us. That evening, when we got back, I went to my small room and wrote in my journal again. But this time I didn't write about guilt. I wrote about gratitude. I wrote, "Forgiveness isn't letting go of the past. It's learning to hold it gently." I also wrote something I never thought I would. Maybe I needed to fall that far to understand love that deep. Over the next few months, I started volunteering at a local shelter for women leaving abusive relationships. At first, I just sorted donations and cleaned floors, but eventually I began helping them write resumes, find jobs, fill out forms. I didn't tell anyone my story, at least not yet, but every woman I met reminded me of who I could have been if I hadn't had someone like Mom to anchor me. One night, after I came back from the shelter, I found her sitting at the kitchen table reading a book. She looked up and said, "You're late." I smiled. "Sorry, lost track of time." She studied me for a second. "You look lighter." "I think I am," I said. "Helping people, it makes me feel like maybe all that pain had a reason." She nodded slowly. "Pain always has a reason. Sometimes we just don't see it until it's over." We sat there, two women sharing quiet, two survivors of the same storm. I realized something then. She wasn't just my mother anymore. She was also human, a woman who'd lost things, rebuilt, kept moving. For so long, I saw her as unbreakable, but now I saw the cracks, and somehow that made her even stronger. Forgiveness didn't erase what I did. It didn't magically heal what was broken, but it gave me something better, a chance to live honestly. And that's when I understood the truth I'd been running from since the beginning. Redemption isn't a destination, it's a practice. It's showing up to fix what you've broken even when no one is watching. It's choosing humility when pride would be easier. It's saying, "I was wrong, not once, but every time the past tries to rewrite itself." Sometimes when I close up the library now, I stand by the window and watch the people walking by. Mothers holding hands with their kids, teenagers rolling their eyes, ordinary lives moving forward. And I whisper a small prayer, not for forgiveness but for wisdom. Because wisdom means never mistaking love for ownership again. And that, more than anything, is what my mother taught me, without ever saying a word. It's strange how peace arrives quietly, No grand moment, no dramatic ending, just an ordinary morning where I wake up, make coffee, and realize the noise in my head is gone. Mum and I don't talk about the past much anymore. We don't need to. It lives between us like a scar, visible but no longer painful. Some nights we still sit by the window of the library after closing, sipping tea while the world outside drifts into darkness. And I think this is what healing looks like. Not perfect, not easy, just honest. Sometimes I drive by the coast. I don't stop, but I slow down enough to see the horizon, the same one that once promised freedom and gave me ruin. Now, when I look at it, I don't feel guilt anymore. I feel gratitude. Because everything I destroyed taught me what truly matters. Not owning things, but protecting the hearts that do. I used to believe redemption was a second chance handed to you by someone else. Now I know it's the first chance you give yourself to be better than yesterday. If you've ever broken something you can't fix, someone's trust, someone's heart, please don't disappear like I did. Stay. Face it. Say the words you're scared to say. And if you can, start small. Wash the dishes. Return the call. Show up. That's where forgiveness begins. I can't change what I did. But every day I try to live in a way that honors the woman who still chose to love me. And if my story reaches you, maybe it's your turn to begin again. If you stayed till the end, thank you. Don't forget to share your thoughts below. I'll be reading.